When you watch Tron, a lot of people tend to think of it as strange. I mean, it's just a computer and programs. Really, the epic battle they're portraying is a computer. In truth, it doesn't really have any effect on our world. It's inconsequential to us. But to the mind of the grid's creator, Flynn, that's not how he sees it. Today, I want to talk to you about the philosophy of Tron. When people think of finding a new source of life, they typically look to outer space, which has been the ongoing assumption. We exist, so something else may exist also. However, Tron happens to take a different approach. The series' main character, Flynn, created the grid to be a new world for humans to exist. He developed Clue to help him create a new world for people. How the heck human flesh is supposed to be codified is beyond explanation, and more than likely doesn't have an explanation, but we're going to look past that for the same reason we look past other science fantasy hiccups. Now, the grid and the programs Flynn and Clue created ended up becoming AI, artificial intelligence. And I don't mean the artificial intelligence that lets self-driving cars figure out how to drive you. I mean the kind of artificial intelligence that makes something inhuman appear as human as possible. J.P. Guilford, a psychologist from the 1950s, categorized intelligence into two categories. There's convergent thinking, which is the ability to answer questions correctly, which machines tend to be able to do very well. That's what they're designed to do. They basically just store information. However, programmers will tell you that there is no such thing as an intelligent machine because none of them have the capacity for Guilford's other form of intelligence, divergent thinking. Divergent thinking is the capability to create many answers out of a single problem. A robot will be able to tell you the capital of France, but it won't be able to tell you how to break into the fashion industry there. That kind of thinking requires the ability to see multiple possible solutions and judge what's the best in your given situation. And the reason I explain this is because that's the kind of intelligence we're dealing with in Tron. The programs in Tron are basically human in terms of their intelligence. No doubt because it's easier for the writers to construct a compelling story, but we still have to accept what we see at face value just as we do codifying humans. The philosophy of Tron shifted when Flynn discovered the ISOs. The ISOs are natural life that originated in the grid. Basically, they're program aliens. They weren't programmed by a human. They were spawned from the complexity of the grid itself. Flynn sees the ISOs as a magnificent scientific feat. Perhaps they were created by complex algorithms of the grid, and so therefore you could argue that they aren't entirely the beauteous and harmonious synchronization between nature and science, but given the situation, they're literally the closest thing to having humans create artificial life. The ISOs are removed from humans. Flynn created the grid, and the grid created the ISOs, so technically, Flynn didn't create them, and Flynn sees them as the next stage towards making the grid a perfect place for humans. However, this is also where everything shifts. You see, now the narrative shifts from the goal being to create a place for humans to live, and now it focuses on the question, are the ISOs natural? How far removed do these programs need to be from human hands before we can consider them a natural creation? Even if they were created through unnatural means, are the ISOs considered a new form of life, or are they considered an error in the system? Now, some of you may be sitting in your seat thinking, well, we've made programs that can write programs, but that isn't the case here. Tron goes to the extreme to show us that these programs, that being Cora, are so human that when reversing the codifying process, she can become flesh from code. The conflict arises when Clue tries to force his pre-programmed goal, that being to create a quote-unquote perfect system, and starts seeing the ISOs as nothing but flaws and assimilating other programs like the Borg. But that's an aspect of the narrative and not of the philosophy of the series, and so that's not what I'm going to focus on. The philosophy with the ISOs that Tron is trying to establish is, how intelligent does something have to be until we consider it alive? What is our definition of alive anyway? Does it have to be flesh and blood? Because the grid can make that happen. Does it need to be indistinguishable from humans? because if I were to meet one of these programs, I wouldn't be able to tell if they were a program. Do they have to be born? Well, what's your definition of birth? If anything, the ISOs are probably the closest thing to a holy creationist myth because they came directly from the world itself. It was only tangentially related to a human, and because it's once removed from human hands, that would mean this life that we see, that being the ISOs, are not the responsibility of a human. So Flynn couldn't technically be considered the equivalent to a god because he didn't directly create the ISOs. All of these questions have been debated for years, and these ideas will still be debated. There is currently no answer, and Tron Uprising does a great job at showing the reaction that the citizens of the grid have when they're confronted with this new form of life. Personally, I don't even have an opinion on this topic. Every time I think I have a good grasp on what I would consider to be the gold standard for quote-unquote life, there's always something that counters it, contradicts it. Maybe the easiest solution is just to assume that, at least to a certain degree, everything is alive. You, your dog, your computer, your clothes, whatever. These sorts of questions end up forcing us to either accept everything as alive or nothing as alive. And we know that nothing isn't alive. That's probably the reason I like Tron so much. These concepts were really fleshed out during Tron Uprising. But what do you guys think? What's your takeaway from these concepts? Is there a standard for life, or is trying to create a standard fruitless? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay beautiful and keep playing.